Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we continue our series on Emerson's journals. We are in journal collection number 24, and Emerson is in Europe. Specifically, he has just left Italy and has moved through the Alps, and he is in Paris, France now. And so we catch up with him in July. He is age 30, and he has been on this tour since December 25th. Well, at least he set sail from America on the 25th of December and is now in the summer in Europe. So, with that said, I will catch up with him in France and we will go ahead from there. Left Geneva in the diligence for Paris Monday morning at 4 o'clock, and presently crossed the line of France and began the ascent of Mount Jura. As we rose toward the top, what noble pictures appeared on the Swiss side! The Alps and Mont Blanc in all his breadth, towering up so cold and wide and dim towards heaven, all uninhabitable and almost inaccessible. Yet more than Saussure have reached the top. France, France. It not only is a change of name, the cities, the language, the faces, the manners have undergone a wonderful change in 3 or 4 days. The running fight we have kept up so long with the fierte of postilions and padroni in Italy is over, and all men are complacent. The face of the country is remarkable, not quite a plain, but a vast undulating champaign without a hill, and all planted like the Connecticut intervals. No fences, the fields full of working women. We rode in the coupe of a diligence by night and by day for 3 days and a half, and arrived at Paris at noon Thursday. I arrived in Paris at noon on Thursday, the 20th of June. My companions, who have been in the Belleville before, and wished it to strike me as it ought, are scarce content with my qualified admiration. Certainly the eye is satisfied on entering the city with the unquestionable tokens of a vast, rich old capital. We crossed the Seine by the Pont Neuf, and was glad to see my old acquaintance, Henry IV, very respectably mounted in bronze on his own bridge. But the saucy faction of the day has thrust a tricolor into his bronze hand, as into a doll's, and in spite of the decency, the stout old monarch is thus obliged to take his part in the whirligig politics of his city. Fie! Louis Philippe. We were presently lodged in the Hotel Montmorency on the Boulevard Montmartre. I have wandered round the city, but I am not well pleased. I have seen so much in 5 months that the magnificence of Paris will not take my eye today. The gardens of the Louvre looked pinched, and the wind blew dust in my eyes, and before I got into the Champs-Élysées I turned about and flatly refused to go farther. I was sorry to find that in leaving Italy I had left forever that air of antiquity and history which her town possesses, and in coming hither had come to a loud, modern New York of a place. I am very glad to find here my cousin Ralph Emerson, who received me most cordially and has aided me much in making my temporary establishment. It were very ungrateful in a stranger to be discontented with Paris, for it is the most hospitable of cities. The foreigner has only to present his passport at any public institution, and the doors are thrown wide to him. I have been to the Sorbonne, where the first scientific men in France lectured at stated hours every day, and the doors are open to all. I have been to Geoffroy Thenard and Gay-Lussac. Then the Collège Royal de France is a similar institution on the same liberal foundation. So with the Collège de Droit and the amphitheater of the Garden of Plants. I have been to the Louvre, where are certainly some first-rate pictures. Leonardo da Vinci has more pictures here than in any other gallery, and I like them well despite of the identity of the features which peep out of men and women. I have seen the same face in his pictures, I think 6 or 7 times. Murillo I see almost for the first time with great pleasure. July. It is a pleasant thing to walk along the boulevards and see how men live in Paris. One man has live snakes crawling about him, and sells soap and essences. Another sells books which lie upon the ground. Another, under my window all day, offers a gold chain. Half a dozen walk up and down with some dozen walking sticks under the arm. A little further one sells cane tassels at 5 sous. Here sits Boots brandishing his brush at every dirty shoe. Then you pass several tubs of goldfish. Then a man sitting at his table cleaning gold and silver spoons with emery and haranguing the passengers on its virtues. Then a person who cuts profiles with scissors. Shall be happy to take yours, sir. Then a table of card puppets which are made to crawl. Then a hand organ. Then a wooden figure called, there's a question mark here, which can put an apple in its mouth whenever a child buys a plum. Then a flower merchant, then a bird shop with 20 parrots, 4 swans, hawks, and nightingales, then the show of the boy with 4 legs, etc., without end. All these are the mere boutiques on the sidewalk, moved from place to place as the sun or rain or the crowd may lead them. Paris. It shall be writ in my memoirs, as Aunt Mary would say, as it was writ of St. Pachomius, and then there's a French quotation. The worse for me in the gay city. Pray, what brought you here, grave sir? The moving boulevard seems to say. Then there's another untranslated quotation here. Title of a novel just published. July 4th. The two gifts of the old world to the new, Columbus and Lafayette. Dined today at Lontières with General Lafayette and nearly 100 Americans. I sought an opportunity of paying my respects to the hero and inquiring after his health. His speech was as happy as usual. A certain Lieutenant Levy did what he could to mar the day. July 9th. How does everybody live on the outside of the world? All young persons thirst for a real existence, for an object, for something great and good which they shall do with all their heart. Meantime, they all pack gloves, or keep books, or travel, or draw indentures, or cajole old women. July 11th. Does any man render written account to himself of himself? I think not. Those who have anything worth repeating, the sad confession. Those who are innocent have been employed in tape and pens. When will good work be found for great spirits? When shall we be able without a blush and without harm to utter to the world our inmost thought? Thus shall I write memoirs? A man who has no courtier but loved men went to Rome, and there lived with boys. He came to France, and in Paris lived alone, and in Paris seldom speaks. If he do not see Carlyle in Edinburgh, he may go to America without saying anything in earnest except to Cranch and to Lindor. The errors of traditional Christianity as it now exists, the popular faith of many millions, need to be removed to let men see the divine beauty of moral truth. I feel myself pledged, if health and opportunity be granted me, to demonstrate that all necessary truth is its own evidence, that no doctrine of God need appeal to a book, that Christianity is wrongly received by all such as it take for a system of doctrines. Its stress being upon moral truth, it is a rule of life, not a rule of faith. And how men can toil and scratch so hard for things so dry, lifeless, unsightly as these famous dogmas, when the divine beauty of the truths to which they are related lies behind them. How they can make such a fuss about the case and never open it to see the jewel is strange and pitiful. Paris, July 12th. Is it not true that in every season of excited thought, when a man has strong conception of God, it is wholly new to him, and he perceives that he has never penetrated so far before into the Holy of Holies, and yet every time? St. Charles Borromeo, what a man was he! What a priest! You cannot answer at the hour the argument of little men, which insists on the unavoidableness of sensual pleasure to such constitutions as ours. But St. Charles Borromeo is answered enough, any great and noble man is answer enough, any one who will not be little, who will bestir himself, who will use his faculties and do his duty. Be cheerful. What an insane habit is this of groping always into the past months, and scraping together every little pitiful instance of awkwardness and misfortune, and keeping my nervous system ever on the rack. It is the disease of a man who is at the same time too idle and respectful to the opinion of others. Il tient son affaire. July 13th. I carried my ticket from Mr. Warden to the Cabinet of Natural History in the Garden of Plants. How much finer things are in composition than alone. 'Tis wise in man to make cabinets. When I was come into the ornithological chambers, I wished I had come only there. The fancy-colored vests of the elegant beings make me as pensive as the hues and forms of a cabinet of shells formerly. It is a beautiful collection, and makes the visitor as calm and genial as a bridegroom. The limits and the possibilities are enlarged, and the real is stranger than the imaginary. Some of the birds have a fabulous beauty. One parrot of a fellow named Psittacus erythopterus from New Holland deserves a special mention, as a picture of Raphael in a gallery. He is the beau of all birds. Then the hummingbirds, little and gay, least of all is the Trochilus niger. I have seen beetles larger. The Trochilus pella hath such a neck of gold and silver and fire. Trochilus delalandi from Brazil is a glorious little tot. La mouche magnifique. Among the birds of paradise I remarked the manucode or Paradisia regia from New Guinea, the Paradisia apoda, and the Paradisia rubra. Forget not the Vuva la epaulettes or Emberiza langucata, black with fine shoulder knots, nor the Ampelus cotinga, nor the Phasianus argus, a peacock-looking pheasant, nor the Trogon pavoninus, called the Coroncu pavonine. I saw black swans and white peacocks, the ibis, the sacred and rosy, the flamingo with a neck like a snake, the toucan rightly called rhinoceros, and a vulture whom to meet in the wilderness would make your flesh quiver, so like an executioner he looked. In the other rooms I saw amber containing perfect mosquitoes, grand blocks of quartz, native gold in all its form of crystallization, threads, plates, crystals, dust, and silver black as from fire. Ah, said I, this is philanthropy, wisdom, taste, to form a cabinet of natural history. Many students were there with grammar and notebook, and a class of boys with their tutor from some school. Here we are impressed with the inexhaustible riches of nature. The universe is a more amazing puzzle than ever as you glance among this bewildering series of animated forms. The hazy butterflies, the carved shells, the birds, beasts, fishes, insects, snakes, and the upheaving principle of life everywhere incipient in the very rock aping organized forms. Not a form so grotesque, so savage, nor so beautiful, but is an expression of some property inherent in man the observer, an occult relation between the very scorpions and man. I feel the centipede in me, cayman, carp, eagle, and fox. I am moved by strange sympathies. I say continually, I will be a naturalist. There's a good collection of skulls in the comparative anatomy chambers. The best skulls seem to be English. The skeleton of the balena looks like the frame of a schooner turned upside down. The garden itself is admirably arranged. They have attempted to classify all the plants in the ground, to put together, that is, nearly as may be, the conspicuous plants of each class on Jussieu's system. Walk down the alleys of this flower garden, and you come to enclosures of animals where almost all that Adam named or Noah preserved are represented. Here are several lions, two great elephants walking out in the open day, a camelopard 17 feet high, the bison, the rhinoceros, and so forth, all manner of four-footed things in air and sunshine in the shades of a pleasant garden where all people, French and English, may come and see without money. By the way, there was a caricature in the print shops respecting the arrival of the giraffe in Paris, exclaiming to the mob, and then there's a series of French words, untranslated, "It is very pleasant to walk in this garden." As I went out, I noticed a placard posted on the gate giving notice that Mr. Jussieu would next Sunday give a public herborization, that is, make a botanical excursion into the country, and inviting all and sundry to accompany him. July 15th. I have just returned from the Père Lachaise. It well deserves a visit and does honor to the French, but they are a vain nation. The tombstones have a beseeching, importunate vanity, and remind you of advertisements. But many are affecting. The one which was of dark slate stone had only this inscription, Mon Pierre. I prefer the Sigit to the Easy Repose as the benigning of the inscriptions, but take the cemetery through, I thought the classics rather carried the day. One epitaph was so singular to be read by me that I wrote it off. Then it is a series of French sentences here about a man named Auguste Charles Collignon, and it looks like he died in the 15th of April, 1830, and it goes on to mentions morals and lessons and essays by Montaigne and the fables of Fontaine. I notice that universally the French write as in the above, here lies Augustus, etc., and we write, here lies the body of, etc., a more important distinction than Roi de France and Roi de Francais. I live at pension with Professor Heary at the corner of the Rue Neuve Vivienne, directly over the entrance of the Passage aux Panoramas. If I had companions in the city, it would be something better to live in the cafe and restaurant. These public rooms are splendidly prepared for travelers and full of company and of newspapers. This Passage aux Panoramas was the first arcade built in Paris and was built by an American, Mr. Thayer. There are now probably 50 of these passages in the city, and few things give more the character of magnificence to the city than the suite of these passages about the Palais Royal. Notre Dame is a fine church outside, but the interior quite naked and beggarly. In general, the churches are very mean inside. Young men are very fond of Paris, partly no doubt because of the perfect freedom from observation as well as interference, in which each one walks after the sight of his own eyes, and partly because the extent and variety of objects offers an unceasing entertainment. So long as a man has francs in his pocket, he needs consult neither time nor place nor other men's convenience. Wherever in the vast city he is within a stone's throw of pâtissière, a cafe, a restaurant, a public garden, a theatre, and may enter when he will. If he wish to go into the Tuileries, perhaps 2 miles off, let him stop a few minutes at the window of a print shop or a bookstall, of which there are hundreds and thousands, and an omnibus is sure to pass in the direction in which he would go, and for 6 sous he rides 2 or 3 miles. Then the streets swarm with the cabinets de lecture, where you find all the journals and all the new books. I spend many hours at the Galignani's, and lately at the English reading room of the Rue Neuve Augustin, where they advertise that they receive 400 journals in all languages, and have more over a very large library. Lastly, the evening need never hang heavy on the stranger's hands. Such ample provision is made here for what the newspapers call nos besoins récréatifs. More than 20 theatres are blazing with light and echoing with fine music every night, from the Académie Royale de la Musique, which is the French opera, down to the children's drama, not to mention concerts, gardens, and shows innumerable. The theatre is the passion of the French, and the taste and splendor of their dramatic exhibitions can hardly be exceeded. The journal, in speaking of the opera last night, declares that Madame D. was received by the dilettanti of Paris with not less joy than the lost soul by the angels in heaven. I saw the opera Gustave perform the other night, and have seen nothing anywhere that could compare with the brilliancy of their scenic decoration. The moonlight scene resembled nothing but nature's, and as for the masked ball, I think there never was a real fancy ball that equaled the effect of this. At the Théâtre Français, where Talma played and Madame Mars plays, I heard Delavigne's new piece, Enfants to Edward, excellently performed. For although Madame Mars speaks French beautifully, and has the manners of a princess, yet she scarcely excels the acting of the less famous performers who support her. Each was perfect in his part. Paris is an expensive place. Rents are very high. All Frenchmen, in all quarters of their dispersion, never lose the hope of coming hither to spend their earnings, and all the men of pleasure in all the nations come hither, which fact explains the existence of so many dazzling shops full of most costly articles of luxury. Indeed, it is very hard for a stranger to walk with eyes 4 or 10 yards in any part of the city. I have been to the Faubourg Saint-Martin to hear the Abbé Chatel, the founder of the Église Catholique Française, It is a singular institution which he calls his church, with newly invented dresses for the priests and martial music performed by large orchestra, relieved by interludes of a piano with vocal music. His discourse was far better than I could expect from these preliminaries. Sometimes he is eloquent. He is a Unitarian, but more radical than anybody in America who takes that name. I was interested in his enterprise, for there is always something pathetic in a new church struggling for sympathy and support. He takes upon himself the whole pecuniary responsibilities of the undertaking, and for his chapel in the Rue Saint-Honoré pays an annual rent of 40,000 francs. He gave notice of a grand funeral fete which is to be solemnized on the anniversary of the 3 days at that chapel. In the print shops they have a figure of the Abbé Chatel on the same picture with Père Enfant and Le Templier. I went this evening into Frascati's long and most noted of the gambling houses or hells of Paris, in which a gentleman had promised to show me. This establishment is in a very handsome house on the Rue Richelieu. Several servants in livery were waiting in the hall, who took our hats on entering, and we passed at once into the suite of rooms in all of which play was going on. The most perfect decorum and civility prevailed. The table was covered with little piles of Napoleons, which seemed to change masters very rapidly, but scarce a word was spoken. Servants carry about lemonade, etc., but no heating liquor. The house, I was told, is always one party in the game. Several women were present, but many of the company seemed to be mere spectators like ourselves. After walking round the tables, we returned to the hall, gave the servants a franc for our hats, and departed. Frascati has grown very rich. Go to the Champs-Élysées after sunset and see the manifold show. An orchestra, a roundabout, a tumbler, sugar-plum gambling tables, harper, dancers, an army of loungers. I went to the Mazarin Library, and Mr. Warden kindly introduced me to the séance of the class of science in the Institute, and pointed out to me the conspicuous men. I saw Biot, Arago, Gay-Lussac, Geoffroy, and others. Several memoirs were read, and some debate ensued thereon. Visited St. Cloud. July 18th. Left Paris in the diligence for Boulogne. Rode all night through St. Denis, Musée, Beauvais, breakfasted at Abbeville, passed through Montreal, Saumur, and reached Boulogne about sunset. At Abbeville we picked up Signor Alessandro, an Italian immigrant. At Boulogne on Saturday morn, 19th, took the steamboat for London. After a rough passage of 20 hours, we arrived at London and landed at the Tower Stairs. England, July 20th. We know London so well in books and pictures and maps and traditions that I saw nothing surprising in this passage up the Thames. A noble navigable stream, lined on each side by a highly cultivated country, full of all manner of good buildings. Then Greenwich and Deptford, hospital, docks, arsenals, fleets of shipping, and then the mighty metropolis itself, old, vast, and still. Scarce anybody was in the streets. It was about 7 o'clock Sunday morning, and we met few persons until we reached St. Paul's. A porter carried our baggage, and we walked through Cheapside, Newgate Street, High Holborn, and found lodgings, according to the direction of my friend in Paris, at Mrs. Fowler's, No. 63 Russell Square. It was an extreme pleasure to hear English spoken in the streets, to understand all the words of children at play, and find that we must not any longer express aloud our opinion of every person we met, as in France and Italy we had been wont to do. Went into St. Paul's, where service was saying, Poor Church. London, July 24th. Here in the great capital, it needs saying something of the creature immortal that swarms on this spot. Coming to Boulogne, I thought of the singular position of the American traveler in Italy. It is like that of a being of another planet who invisibly visits the earth. He is a protected witness. He sees what is that boasted liberty of manners, free of all Puritan starch, and sees what it is worth, how surely it pays its tax. He comes a freeman among slaves. He learns that old saws are true, which is a great thing. He is not now to be answered any longer in his earnest assertions of moral truth by the condescending explanation that these are his prejudices of country and education. He has seen how they hold true through all the most violent contrasts of condition and character. July 28th. Attended divine service at Westminster Abbey. The Bishop of Gloucester preached. It is better than any church I have seen except St. Peter's. Happy the man who never puts on a face, but receives every visitor with that countenance he has on. And then the editor says, there are no further notes on London except the following list. Westminster Abbey, St. Stephen's, Haymarket, Mr. Irving's Chapel, Gallery of the Practical Science, London University, Zoological Gardens, Regent Street, Athenaeum, St. James, Mr. Fox's Chapel, Wilberforce's funeral, Regent's Park, immense city, very dull city. July 31st. At Dr. Bowring's Milton's house, inscription on the wall, Sacred to Milton, the Prince of Poets. Editor's insertion here. Here follows the account of the visit to Wordsworth at Ambleside, which is printed in full in English traits, but with slight alterations. Almost nobody in Highgate knew his, Coleridge's, name. I asked several persons in vain. At last a porter wished to know if I meant an elderly gentleman with white hair. Yes, the same. Why, he lives with Mr. Gilman. Ah, yes, that is he. So he showed me the way. Mr. Bowring says that Wilson and Hogg went to see Wordsworth, and the morning was fine, and then there was a rainbow, and altogether it was genial. So Hogg said to Wordsworth, this is a fit spot for poets to meet in. Wordsworth drew himself up with ineffable disdain, saying, poets indeed. Insertion from the editor. Leaving London August 9th, Mr. Emerson visited Oxford, then Birmingham, but made no records in the journal. Matlock, Tuesday evening, 9 o'clock, August 13th. Beautiful valley, esteemed the most romantic dell in England. Here sit I close by the Derwent and under the eaves of the caverns of the Peak of Derbyshire. But it will not do to visit even these fine things alone. I think I must not stay to visit even Haddon Hall and Chatsworth. Pleasant it was to me to spend yesterday with Mr. Dewey in such a visit. How reared himself old Kenilworth into the English morning sky. The ruin is as lordly as was the perfect state. I thought if I had a boy to educate, I would carry him by moonlight into the inner floor of the Lancaster building. It would doom him a poet. The smell of the fresh ground, the cellar's smell in a hall so princely as Lancaster's, was tragical. Quote, the hall of Kindlin is gloomy this night, wanting fire, wanting candle. I will weep a while, and then be silent. End quote. The visit to Warwick Castle is a proper appendix to the visit to Kenilworth, for Warwick is what Kenilworth was. It overhangs the Avon. In the interim betwixt these two visits, we went to St. Mary's Church and saw Our Lady's Chapel. In this day's ride, I marked that the botany of England and America is alike. The clematis, the mints, the goldenrods, the gerardias, the wild geranium, the wild parsley, and 20 more better known to my eye than to my ear. I saw and recognized them all. I passed through Tamsworth and saw the Tower and the town, and thought up the old jingle of my school days. Largess, largess, Lord Marmion. They held him Lord of Fontenay, of Lutterworth and Scrivel Bay, of Tamworth Tower in town. We passed through Ashby de la Zouche, and I saw the ruin of the old castle. We crossed the Trent, we came to Derby. We see throughout Europe the counterparts of the Americans. I passed Sir Robert Peel's place, then Sir Richard Arkwright's. Here the editor inserts, Mr. Emerson then passed northward, visiting Haddon Hall through Bakewell, Sheffield, spending a day in York, thence by Newcastle and Berwick to Edinburgh. There are no notes of this part of the journey, nor of his visit to Edinburgh, where he spent 4 days. The narrative then begins again on some loose sheets, apparently a copy of a letter. Glasgow, August 23rd. May I send you an account of my romancing from Edinburgh to the Highlands? I was told it was so easy, at an expense of 2 days, to see that famous country of Ben Lomond, Loch Katrine, and the rest. So up the Forth sailed I, in the steamboat for Stirling, cold, rainy wind in our teeth all the way. We passed Ollowa and Falkirk, yes, close by Bannockburn, I quietly reading my book in the cabin. At Stirling I saw the ruin of the Abbey of Cambus Kenneth and the view from Stirling Castle. At night, in a car being too late for the coach, I rode through the rain 10 miles to Doune and Callander. Of the scenery I saw little more than my horse's head. At Callander I slept hard from 10 till 5, and was then walked to hasten to the Trossachs Inn. This passage was made in an uncovered car again, and the rain wet me through my own coat and my landlord's over that. And though we passed Loch Venacar and then Loch Acray, yet the scenery of a shower bath must be always much the same and perpendicular rather than horizontal. Once, when the flood intermitted, I peeped out from under the umbrella, and it was a pretty place. We dried and breakfasted at the Trossachs Inn. I walked with a party 1.5 miles to the head of Loch Katrine. It had cleared up, though the wind blew stoutly, and I had the satisfaction of the Trossachs. The ornament of Scottish scenery is the heather, which colors the country to the hue of a rose. In 2 boats with 4 oars each, we pushed into the lake and got as far as Ellen's Island, the Isle of the Lady of the Lake. Ben Venu and Ben Anne rise on either side. The lake was rough, the wind was strong, and our party were spattered, and the rowers which made such little way that it seemed impracticable to attempt to go through the lake, which is 9 miles long. They put into the first cove the shore afforded. Part of the company returned to the Trossachs, and a part who were bent on reaching that night Glasgow had nothing for it but to walk to the end of the lake, which, following the windings of the shore, is 14 miles. There was no better road than a sheep track through every variety of soil, now sand, now morass, now fern and brake, now stones. But the day was fine, and we fared, one of the boatmen acting as guide. We embarked in the boat at 9 o'clock. 5 out of 15 reached the little hut at the end of the lake at 12 1/2. Here we dried our shoes and drank, I drank whiskey, and eat oat cake. It was 5 miles to Inversnaid, where we must take the steamboat on Loch Lomond. There was no conveyance but our legs, which served us again. A country as bare almost as a paved street. Mountains, mountains, but I don't remember that I saw a sheep. At Inversnaid, a hut full of Highlandmen and women talking Gaelic, no chimney, and the peat smoke escaped as it could. Behind the house was a roaring cataract. The steamboat came, and through much fear and tribulation on the rough waves, we were transported in a little boat and embarked therein. And so on we fared through this lake about 15 miles to Balloch. The wind blew my cap off, which had travelled with me from Malta where it was made, and it fell into Loch Lomond. My hat was with the baggage all at Glasgow, and the loss not to be repaired, so I shivered and sweltered when need was in the rain and wind with a handkerchief on my head. We landed at Balloch and took coach 5 miles farther to Dumbarton. At Dumbarton we were carried to the steamboat on the Clyde and went up to Glasgow, where we arrived about 10 o'clock at night. My own appearance was no doubt resolute, arriving at an inn where my baggage had not, in an old surtout, without a hat and without a rag of baggage. They put me in a little room aloft. I was in no condition to dictate, and crept to bed. This morn came the trunk, and armed with razors and clean shirt I recovered my courage. I visited the cathedral of 1123, spared by Knox, and now a Presbyterian church. In the vaulted cellar of the same is laid the scene of the part of Rob Roy. Then to the Salt Market, and to the Hunterian Museum, and to the walks behind the college. A little girl named Jeanie was my guide to the tower of the church. Broad Scotch she spake, but she said her name was not Deans. Insertion by the editor. A large part of Mr. Emerson's account of his visit to Carlisle was printed by him in English Traits, and is therefore omitted here. Carlisle in Cumberland, August 26th. I am just arrived in Mary Carlisle from Dumfries, a white day in my years. I found the youth I sought in Scotland, and good and wise and pleasant he seems to me. Thomas Carlyle lives in the parish of Dunscore, 16 miles from Dumfries, amid wild and desolate heathery hills, and without a single companion in this region out of his own house. There he has his wife, a most accomplished and agreeable woman. Truth and peace and faith dwell with them and beautify them. I never saw more amiableness than is in his countenance. He speaks broad Scotch with evident relish. In London yonder, I liked well aboot it, etc., etc. Nothing can be better than his stories. The philosophic phrase, "The Duchess of Queensberry was appointed to possess this estate." By God Almighty, added the lady, Wordsworth, the Earl of Lonsdale, the town of Whitehaven, the Liverpool duellist, Coleridge, Allan Cunningham, Hazlitt, Walter Scott, Sheriff of Selkirk, Mud Magazine, Sand Magazine, Coronation of King William. T.C. was born in Annandale. Is reading multifarious, Tristram Shandy, Robinson Crusoe, Robertson's America, Rousseau's Confessions, discovered to him that he was not such an ass as he had imagined. 10 years ago he learned German. London, heart of the world, wonderful only for the mass of human beings. Splendid bridge from the New World to the Old, built by Gibbon. T.C. had made up his mind to pay his taxes to William and Adelaide Gulf with great cheerfulness as long as William is able to compel the payment, and he shall cease to do so the moment he ceases to compel them. Landor's principle is mere rebellion, and he fears that is the American principle also. Himself worships the man that will manifest any truth to him. Mrs. Carlyle told of the disappointment when they had determined to go to Weimar, and the letter arrived from the bookseller to say the book did not sell and they could not go. The first thing Goethe sent was the chain she wore around her neck and how she capered when it came. But since that time he had sent many things. Mrs. C. said when I mentioned the Burns piece that it always had happened to him upon those papers to hear of each 2 or 3 years after. T.C. prefers London to any other place to live in. John S. Mill, the best mind he knows, more purity, more force, has worked himself clear of Benthamism. The best thing T.C. thought in Stewart's book was the story of the bootblack that a man can have meat for his labor. Ambleside, August 28th. This morning I went to Rydell Mount and called upon Mr. Wordsworth. Editor's insertion. Here follows the story of this visit, which is printed in English traits almost exactly as in the notebook. Wordsworth surprised his visitor by offering to repeat some of his verse as they walked in the garden. This amused Mr. Emerson at first, but on reflection he thought it kind and fitting for a poet to do. The poet is always young, and this old man took the same attitudes that he probably had at 17, whilst he recollected the sonnet he would recite. His egotism was not at all displeasing, obtrusive as I had heard. To be sure, it met no rock. I spoke as I felt, with great respect of his genius. He spoke very kindly of Dr. Channing, who sat a long time in this very chair, laying his hand upon an armchair. He mentioned Burns's sons. On my return to the inn, he walked near a mile with me, talking, and ever and anon stopping short to impress the word or the verse, and finally parted from me with great kindness and returned across the fields. His hair is white, but there is nothing very striking about his appearance. August 29th. From Kendal this morning to Lancaster, thence to Manchester, and there was deposited with my luggage in the coach on the railway to Liverpool. We parted at 11 minutes after 6 and came to the 21st milestone at 11 minutes after 7. Strange it was to meet the return cars, to see a load of timber, 6 or 7 masts, dart by you like a trout. Everybody shrinks back when the engine hisses by him like a squib. The fire that was dropped on the road under us all along by our engine looked as we rushed over it as a coal swung by the hand in circles, not distinct but a continuous glare. Strange proof how men become accustomed to oddest things. The laborers did not lift their umbrellas to look as we flew by them on their return at the side of the track. It took about 1½ hours to make the journey, 32 miles. It has been performed in less than the hour. Liverpool, August 30th. I talked commonplaces today with a man at this hotel who told me he had lived in Boston until I found out it was Jacob Perkins. He says it is not true that he has failed for want of material strong enough to hold his force. He says he has succeeded in everything he has undertaken but in making money. Liverpool, September 1st. I thank the great God who has led me through this European scene, this last schoolroom in which he has pleased to instruct me, from Malta's Isle, through Sicily, through Italy, through Switzerland, through France, through England, through Scotland, in safety and pleasure, and has now brought me to the shore, and the ship that steers westward. He has shown me the men I wish to see, Landor, Coleridge, Carlyle, Wordsworth. He has thereby comforted and confirmed me in my convictions. Many things I owe to the sight of these men. I shall judge more justly, less timidly of wise men forevermore. To be sure, not one of these is a mind of the very first class, but what the intercourse with each of these suggests is true of intercourse with better men, that they never fill the ear, fill the mind. No, it is an idealized portrait which always we draw of them. Upon an intelligent man wholly a stranger to their names, they would make in conversation no deep impression, none of the world-filling fame. They would be remembered as sensible, well-read, earnest men, not more. Especially are they all deficient, all these four, in different degrees, but all deficient in insight into religious truth. They have no idea of that species of moral truth which I call the first philosophy. Peter Hunt is as wise a talker as either of these men. Don't laugh. The comfort of meeting men of genius, such as these, is that they talk sincerely. They feel themselves to be so rich that they are above the meanness of pretending to knowledge which they have not, and they frankly tell you what puzzles them. But Carlyle is so amiable that I love him. But I am very glad my traveling is done. A man not old feels himself too old to be a vagabond. The people at their work, the people whose avocations I interrupt by my letters of introduction, accuse me by their looks for leaving my business to hinder theirs. These men make you feel that fame is a conventional thing, and that man is a sadly limitary spirit. You speak to them as to children or persons of inferior capacity, whom it is necessary to humor, adapting our tone and remarks to their own prejudices, and not to our knowledge of the truth. I believe in my heart it is better to admire too rashly as I do, than to be admired too rashly, as the great men of this day are. They miss by their premature canonization a great deal of necessary knowledge, and one of these days must begin the world again, as to their surprise they will find needful poor. I speak now in general, and not of these individuals. God save a great man from a little circle of flatterers. I know it is sweet, very sweet ratsbane. Today I heard Mr. Hincks, Mr. Martineau, and Mr. Yates preach. Yates, who wrote against war law. He preached the best sermon I have heard in England, a great deal the best. Here at my hotel, the Star and Garter, Paradise Street, I have found Jacob Perkins, the inventor of so many improvements in steam engines. He has been illuminating me upon the science of heat. Could not Wordsworth have kept to himself his intimations that his new edition was at the bookseller's and contained some improvements? John Milton was a poet, not a bookmaker. Although the Muse made Shakespeare, Milton made his Muse. True elevation, which nothing can bring down, is that of moral sentiment. All Carlyle's intellect did not hinder an unpleasant emotion at hearing about his occupation, but Johnson's school, or Peter Hunt's, are above contempt, and an act of heroism, a Roman recovery, would have enshrined C a saint for me. I love his love of truth. The spot is the preference of such a scrub as Mirabeau to Socrates. Liverpool, September 2nd. No sailing today, so you may know what I have seen and heard in the 4 days I have been here. Really nothing external, so I must spin my thread from my own bowels. It must be said this is the least agreeable city to the traveller in all England, the old, the rich, the strong nation, full of arts and men and memories, nor can I feel any regret in the presence of the best of its sons that I was not born here. I am thankful that I am an American as I am thankful that I am a man. It is its best merit to my eye that it is the most resembling country to America which the world contains. The famous burden of English taxation is bearable. Men live and multiply under it, though I have heard a father in the higher rank of life speak with regret of the increase of his family. That is all I can say. I am at a dead stand. I can neither write nor read more. If the vessel do sail, they say we shall be drowned on the lee shore. If she do not sail, I perish waiting. What's the odds? I have plainly said my last word. It is the prodigality of ink, the wanton destruction of paper to add another syllable, and withal a singular exhibition of what fatuity a man is capable who reckons himself sometimes an educated and thinking man. Yet must I write still? Why? These lines are the expectants of the dinner, and it is cold, and I cannot go out. Why should I? I have bid good-bye to all the people. Shall I make them repeal their tears and benedictions? There are no books in the house. I have digested the newspaper. I have no companion. Even Mr. Perkins, when at home, has finished his communications, and we have got to theology at last. If it won't rain after the soles and cutlets, I will brave one family whom I have parted from. Ah me, Mr. Thomas Carlyle, I would give a gold pound for your wise company this gloomy eve. Ah, we would speed the hour. Ah, I would rise above myself. What self-complacent glances and cast the soul about in the moment of fine conversation, esteeming itself the author of all the fine things it utters, and the master of the riches the memory produces, and how scornfully looks it back upon the plain person it was yesterday without a thought. It occurs forcibly, yea, sometimes pathetically, that he who visits a man of genius, out of admiration for his parts, should treat him tenderly. 'Tis odds, but he will be disappointed. That is not the man of genius's fault. He was honest and human, but the fault of his own ignorance of the units of human excellence. Let him feel that his visit was unwelcome, and that he is indebted to the tolerance and good nature of his idol, and so spare him the abuse of his own reacting feelings, the backstroke. September 3rd. No sailing still, but sitting still. I went to the railroad and saw Rocket and Goliath and Pluto and Firefly and the rest of the Vulcanian generation. Mr. Perkins say they should not go faster than 15 miles the hour. It racks the engines to go faster. There are 30 locomotives upon the road. These only have the circulators. There is no such thing as latent heat. The thermometer indicates all the heat that is present. Only when the particles of the water expand in vapor, the particles of the heat expand also. High-pressure steam engines are safer than low. He says that he confidently expects the time when the ocean will be navigated by merchantmen by steam as most economical means, but there is a great deal to be done first. That now very little advantage is taken of the expansion of steam, its most important property. Mr. Perkins recited with glee his victory over one of the directors of the Manchester road. Mr. Perkins showed that his engine had beat the Sun, Stephenson's, all last week, doing more work with less coke. Director said that was because Sun had been out of order. Mr. P. reminded him of the quantity of coke which the director had alleged was needful always, to the ton and the hour, for said engine, to which director assented. Well, said Mr. P., I have here certificates of your servants to show that the Sun performed the same work all last week with a fraction less coke. The director acknowledged it could not be much out of order. There's an editor's insertion here. The notes which follow were very likely made while waiting in Liverpool, Mr. Emerson perhaps then having in view the writing the lecture which he found opportunity to deliver in November as the introductory discourse before the Boston Society of Natural History. It should be borne in mind that he had turned his back on tradition and turned to nature as his teacher, and he had already begun his book, Nature. Natural History. I don't think that we are yet master of all the reasons why we should cultivate it. Natural magic, good for society, a diffused taste in natural science, good in a higher degree to the cultivators. 1. In the knowledge it communicates, pump, natural steam engine, ship, boundaries. 2. In the explanation it gives of moral truth, shells are symbols. 3. In the effect upon the character. It makes the intellect exact. It makes the manners simple, makes all boys. It generates enthusiasm. 4. Salutary to the body. Antaeus. Higher questions. Beauty. How old is the pebble? Is it true? Natural history of water, of coal. It makes every natural event a scientific experiment, as a snowstorm. Compare an orrery with the solar system to see how beautiful is nature. Her ropes never entangle, nor crack, nor wear, nor weigh. They are invisible. So the magnet, simplicity of the means, bees fanning themselves, good for the body, good for the knowledge it communicates, good in its effect upon the mind and character, explains moral truth, elementary forms of bodies revealed by polarization of light, elective affinities, polarity of matter, light, electricity, galvanism, magnetism. Wednesday, September 4th. At 2 o'clock, left Liverpool in the New York of New York. 14 cabin passengers, 16 steerage, ship 516 tons. This concludes Part 5 of Emerson's journal collection number 24. In Part 6, which will be the final part of journal collection 24, we will begin by following Emerson's journey over the Atlantic back to America, and then conclude with his last entries at the end of that year. Thank you for listening.